Hello everyone, I guess hopefully you're having a wonderful day, and today we are here with a video on how you can avoid falling for one of the biggest tricks in the book when it comes to collecting soccer cards. This is a video I'd recommend for people that have been in it for a while, and especially newer people, especially if you are someone that is overseas. This is primarily aimed by non-American viewers. However, it is very much applicable to the American viewers as well, so don't feel left out. Nonetheless, let's try to get into this very quickly because I recorded this once already and I was way too long-winded, so we're going to try to make it a little quicker. If you enjoy the videos, do make sure to leave a like. Helps me a ton and I'd appreciate it greatly. But with that said, let's get into it. So as you can see by the thumbnail, this is going to have to deal with flippers and sort of the impact on the cards that people decide to buy. So we'll start with the first aspect, which is please don't blame the flippers. This isn't their fault. The people that make these types of videos and this content, they are not forcing you to do anything. They're not forcing you to buy certain things. They are influencing you in ways that you might not have intended, and probably they didn't intend to either, but you have to be aware of that going in, right? They're creating card show content, nothing more, right? That is key. They're creating card show content, nothing more. That is honestly it. They're not telling you that these are great cards. Sometimes they might, but it seems to be for the most part that they are not forcing you into these situations. And finally, liquidity is king. A lot of these cards that people are buying at these card shows and a lot of these vlogs where they show you, I'm picking up this, I'm moving this. Point being, they might not be buying cards they necessarily want or like or desire for their own collection or whatever it may be. They purely want to buy something at a low price that is somewhat liquid that they can then sell for a higher price, right? That is their goal. So we'll start by comparing shows versus online and sort of the people that partake in both of these. So when it comes to shows, it's incredibly liquid. People are spending their time, their energy, they're getting up, going to the show. They paid for a table fee. They might have paid to get into the show. They went there with an idea of they want to buy, they want to sell. So that makes things much more liquid. You can almost go up to anyone, and if you gave them enough of a discount, they probably buy whatever you have. And so at the end of the day, you can really move at a much greater pace at shows. In addition to that, there are regional buyers, so you have to sort of play the game of knowing what the region wants and then giving that to them. So just because people might like certain cards in one section doesn't mean that that is a universal truth, right? And then finally, there is pressure to buy and sell at these shows because again, you're spending your time, energy, money to get there and do these sorts of things. And especially if you're a dealer or flipper, this is where you butter your bread. So you have to move. And that's going to incentivize people to buy or sell different things depending on the situation. When we move over to eBay, it is much slower moving. You can sort of operate at your own pace. There are international buyers and international buyer pools, so everything is on the table in terms of what is loved and desired, not just whatever is in a certain section of the world. And finally, like I mentioned earlier, slower moving, you can move at your own pace, which basically means that there are so many options on eBay for the most part that you can pick and choose what you want, while with a card show, you might not find another card of that player, another parallel of that player that you truly wanted, so you really can't make up your rules there. On eBay, you can be much more restrictive with what you're going to go ahead and buy. So we'll pop on over to a tale of two cards, or two stickers in the scenario. I'm going to call them cards, just, play the game with me here. One is owned by a card show flipper on the left, and one on the right is an overseas eBayer, and basically the thought processes I imagine each of them have. When it comes to a hold time for a card show flipper, more than likely, 1 hour to 1 month. You probably don't want to be holding cards much longer than that. If you are, that's sort of a sign that either you're overpriced or you have a card people don't want, and ultimately you'd move off of that as you go. Typically you want an in-demand player, like I mentioned earlier. Liquidity is king. That speaks back to that. You want something that's already graded. Again, liquidity is king. That speaks back to that. You don't want people questioning what grade is this, what's the price point on it. You just want something easy. So PSA graded 10 is going to be that. You also have little competition, as I mentioned before. There's not going to be tons of Julian Alvarez at a card show in America, so the cards bought and sold typically are going to be ones that are, desired by many, but might not be the most collectible, I guess. In addition to that, there's no attachment from the flipper side. You really aren't going to hold on to this player because you truly love and adore them. You just want to make some money off of it, so you're going to be quick. And then finally, you can sell it at any moment at a card show. Like I said earlier, if you offer people low enough comps or a significant enough discount, they will just buy it to then go ahead and sell it themselves. It's just sort of the way it works. An overseas eBayer, I feel like, has some different things that they would have to consider with a card or sticker like this, and it's not as positive, right? The first one is that your hold time is going to be much longer. If you are someone that is trying to flip, which, typically what I see is people following the American dealer and what they do and then trying to recreate it themselves overseas, one of the main problems is hold time. I mean, at the absolute lowest, you're going to hold it for a couple weeks. More than likely, it's going to be a couple months. And so at that point, you could then go to a couple years. If things don't work out the right way, if a player, say, gets injured in the couple months you're trying to flip it, or if the team starts performing poorly, or if the set's going down in price, whatever it may be, there's just so many variables that you open yourself up to. I think it's dangerous. With that added time, you have to worry that the player is hyped for the time being, but might not be hyped at the time you want to go and sell. You have to worry that there are going to be more getting graded throughout the time that you own this, much more than the other, American influencer that can flip this quickly. You also have to worry about immense competition on eBay in terms of Julian Alvarez cards. They are everywhere. So is someone going to choose your PSA 10? It's going to be much more difficult to hope. And then also you might end up becoming a believer, or you might be a believer. These American guys, I mean, some of them are believers and do like to invest in prospect, and I get that. But for the most part, the flipper guys, they're not going to hold on to a card like this in hopes that Julian Alvarez becomes the guy one day. And then finally, you have added fees as in eBay or overseas. I mean, by the time you get done paying for shipping, taxes, whatever else you got to pay for, and then you go and sell it yourself and have to do the same thing all over again. I mean, you're losing 15 to 20% that would actually be what the card show flipper wants. I mean, the card show flipper is dying for 15-20% margins, while you're already giving away 15 to 20% at the point of purchase. So I think that that is a huge deal. Something that's important that I don't think a lot of people consider is that at these shows in America, there are just way more shows, right? For one, when it comes to that, I hear a lot of European people say, oh, I'm going to buy this and then sell it at this card show that's in 4 months from now. Like, that is a long time to wait to try to flip, and then you have to hope that when you go to that card show, people are going to buy it, and if they don't, maybe you have to wait another 4 months or another 4 months. While in America, you could go to show after show after show and see a few shows within a couple months, and so you are running at such a quicker pace than any overseas buyers that is going to be a huge impact. In addition to that, the amount of money flowing at American shows is just more than overseas, for a variety of reasons, but one would be, and the primary one in my opinion, is that we are just so much more into cards at this current point in time. It's such a more universally accepted thing, to the point where people are willing to throw money back onto this stuff, assuming that it's going to increase and that they can sell it eventually in the future. We don't want to say that that's the case, but I think that's what encourages a lot of people to probably overspend on cards. And so just because we do that here doesn't necessarily mean people are going to want to do that at other places. And I think that that's important to note. In addition to that, the different personas that exist between a card show flipper and an overseas eBayer. As you can see by my two depictions here, I think that the card show flipper is much more about trying to make money for themselves, be an independent sort of business guy or flipper or entrepreneur, whatever you want to call yourself. They are much more in that lens of person than an overseas eBayer, who, while they might try to flip, I truly think at heart most of them want to be collectors or are collectors, at least to a much higher degree than what I see over here in America. Going through some of the attributes of each, a card show flipper in America has no interest in older players for the most part. They're not that liquid unless they are some of the biggest names, and also most card show flippers, especially for soccer here in America, probably only started watching the sport in the last decade. So they're not going to have that profound knowledge of what came prior, let alone wanting to go and buy those cards. In addition, they're probably going to go with gut over research, because most of the time you have to be fast-moving, quick-acting, and other than finding a comp, you can't really do a deep dive on a card at a show. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, no attachment. They are not a true collector in the slightest of senses. For the most part, some of them may have a small PC that they, sort of dabble in, but for the most part, they are not a soccer card collector. Most of their purchases that they make are not for collecting purposes. Of course, then that means money is greater than cards, and I think by a large margin, most of them would surely flip their cards into some sort of utility in real life if they ever had a chance. And also, they're much more of a short-term thinker because they have to if they are flipping and trying to operate at a fast pace and build a bankroll. On the other hand, the overseas eBayer probably just loves the greats of the game, loves their club, whatever it may be. They likely share a club with either their dad or a granddad. It's passed down from generation to generation, and it's much more organic in terms of how they've wound up here rather than the card show flipper in America. They're probably much more thoughtful with how to spend their money, considering, again, it's not going to be as easy to move. They probably are pretty new to this, so they're scared, or at least not as willing to go guns a-blazing into a spending spree on soccer cards. Likely, they are a true collector in some sense or the other. It's much harder to get into cards overseas, so if you are truly into it, that gives me an indication that you actually are a collector because you have to go out of your way, while in America, you could have just been someone that was really into crypto and just found your way into cards, and now here you are flipping and doing whatever. Finally, I think a lot of the flipping that comes from an overseas eBayer is that they want to flip cards to be able to fund their hobby, which I find to be much more of a commendable act than the card show flipper in America that's going to surely take the money out of the hobby and then go spend it on themselves or whatever, bills they got to pay or things they want to buy, whatever it may be. So the card show flipper in America is looking to take money out of the hobby, while the overseas eBayer is probably just looking to put that back in and be able to build a bankroll. And while I find that commendable, I do think it can be problematic. Reason being, I think that the viewing of these American card show flipper videos totally warps your perception of what's collectible, what people actually are chasing. You start to think that whatever you see at these shows are what people truly like. And while it may be true for that segment in time or at that specific show or between these specific dealers, on a greater scale, in 5 to 10 years, oftentimes it's not going to be the same cards that people are buying and selling because ultimately they are not truly collecting. And this is a hard question to grasp. We'll talk a bit more about it later, but you have to ask yourself, here, these are the types of cards I feel like you'd see at an American card show, right? A base Kylian Mbappe, a refractor Ronaldo, a couple case hits of the new hyped prospects, and ask yourself the question, why are people collecting these, right? What is the end goal? If you've ever started to collect something, at some point or another, you ask yourself, well, what's the purpose, right? If you're buying a Kylian Mbappe base 2018, well, what are you doing with that? Are you looking to put together the rainbow? Because if so, buying a base doesn't really make much sense. It's the lowest level. You should probably work on other things. Are you trying to put together the 2018 base set? Probably not, especially in PSA 10. That would just be a lot of grading. Are you trying to put together a Kylian Mbappe base run of all of his years? That's going to take forever. It's going to be a ton of different cards. I just truly don't understand what the collectability is of a lot of this stuff at times. Say a 2017 Cristiano Ronaldo refractor. Yeah, it's a nice card, looks good, but are you putting together the refractor set? Again, if you're putting together the rainbow, that's a pretty low card on the rainbow, not even really counted. Are you going to buy his Topps Chrome refractor of each and every year? Is that your goal? Again, I don't know. And same thing can be true and said about the Jude Bellingham and the Erling Haaland, even to a higher degree, right? If you're buying those cards, are you going to buy all 10 years of Color Blasts that come out for Haaland, or all 15 years, or whatever it may be? Are you buying everyone in that particular set? What is the point in terms of a collecting sense? I don't think a lot of people answer this question. I think a lot of people buy cool, shiny cards and then ask the questions later. And I understand that, but I think that it can be difficult, especially if you are just buying based on what you're seeing online. This brings me to the European journey, a path I've seen many Europeans take, and one that, I find to be moderately depressing, mostly because I find myself going on the opposite route of this journey as an American. I was sort of brought up a different way and ended up a different way, and so we'll talk about that now. A lot of people get into soccer and they immediately go for the types of things that they love or that they admired and would love to strive for, like, say, the Steven Gerrard rookie sticker. I'm not saying that you got to go out and buy these or whatever. This is a type of sticker that, hey, you're a Liverpool fan all your life, you get into the hobby, you say to yourself, well, I want a really good Stevie G, and then you get it, right? And ultimately, what ends up happening after this often is that these people start to get bored, right? They'll buy a few players that they liked as a kid, and then they'll be like, well, what else is there to do, right? And so then they start to get into the flipper, prospector realm of, trying to figure out what are the people liking now and how can I get in on that, right? So eventually that might lead you to something like a base Prism card. We saw that happen in 2020 and 2021 where a lot of people were really into base Prism. Ultimately, that probably evolves to maybe a better type of a card. You start to get into 2017 refractors and, oh, this is what people like now, so I'll start buying this. And then you sort of end up eventually getting to some of the more prospecty guys and some of their rarer cards that are, really going to be desirable one day, at least in your head. And this is what I see happen a lot, is people go from a card that they actually truly like, think that's, an enjoyable card. They probably wouldn't even sell it from their PC just because they enjoy it that much. And then eventually over time, they start buying cards they don't like, that they probably don't even want, but that they think other people are going to want, right? And sort of the problem with this is, I think that the types of cards you're seeing here, this Kylian Mbappe absolutely boomed in 2020. A lot of people then started chasing that. This type of Cristiano Ronaldo or Refractor Topps Chrome, a lot of people started chasing that in 21, 22. And then, sort of your Color Blast, case hits, all that, people have started chasing lately. And that's great and all, but if you would have been the guy just buying Merlin Steven Gerrards in 2020 or, insert pre-modern great in 2020, you actually would have killed it in 2021 and 2022 because that became what everyone wanted, right? And if you would have stayed on the path of buying greats of the game and gone into vintage, you would have killed it in 22 and 23 because that is what people ended up wanting, right? That is where the big boom happened. And so, sure, both of those sectors that boomed, the pre-modern and the vintage, they came back to earth like everything. But at the end of the day, you weren't constantly chasing in things that you were getting too late, right? When people started getting into Prism, they were too late. When people start getting into Topps Chrome, you're probably too late. When people start getting into really low numbered or really scarce modern stuff, you're probably too late. And so ultimately, I think a lot of these people would have been best served by just being a collector, buying cards that they like, learning about the greats of the game, and buying those rather than trying to constantly chase what they see Americans do. Because, let's be honest, why are you following what Americans do in soccer? That makes no sense. We are not the people that created this. We're not the people that know anything about this. We are merely just people that figured out about it and tried to hijack it in a way, or at least some of us have. I like to think I don't try to hijack it, but, to each their own. If you think I do, whatever. And so that brings me to my final thoughts. First off is know what you are and be true to yourself. Are you a collector? Are you a flipper? Are you an investor? Most people are probably a mix of some of those, and that's okay, but understand what you are and be true to that. Don't try to stray and sort of adhere to what other people are doing. Ultimately, trust your gut and think for yourself. I think, again, like I mentioned before, so many of these European guys that got into American types of cards and that type of stuff, I think that they would have just been much more served financially and within their collection if they just focused on what they liked and went down their own rabbit holes rather than, following whatever the trend is of the current soccer card flipper. Personally, I think that it would be beneficial if you try collecting before flipping, especially. And that even goes with modern cards, right? Don't collect a vintage set and then get into modern and think you know what you're doing. Try collecting a modern set, right? Try collecting a modern player. It's very hard. So if you understand that, you can then sort of look through that lens and think about what people would actually be interested in for flipping. You could be a much better flipper yourself if you do want to become a flipper. Like I mentioned before, there's nothing inherently wrong with flipping. I just think that you have to understand what plan of attack you need to take. Then I'd say understand that we are in the early stages of soccer. I don't say this as a pump piece. I'm not saying that, soccer's going to go to the moon. We're just ending two, baby. No, what I'm saying is soccer collecting on a large scale has only been around for 3 to 4 years. It really wasn't much before that. There were people doing it, of course, but it wasn't a large space like it is now. And thus, as time goes on, things change. That's a guarantee throughout life. There is no stopping that. So just because something exists now, or a narrative exists now, or a player's hype now, doesn't mean that it's going to be forever. So be willing to change. Be willing to go against the grain. I feel like in soccer, more than any other sport, you should be willing to say, hey, this is the norm, and I don't believe it, and I'm not going after it. And I think that worst comes to worst, you were wrong, but we're all going to be wrong, so what's it matter? And then the final point is to take your time and enjoy the journey. I feel like a lot of the time people are just way too amped up, way too eager, and probably, go a little too hard too soon. Ultimately, if you truly are someone that wants to collect or invest or flip for a very long time in the space, collecting is probably going to be the easiest way to be here for a while. But if you want to do the other two as well, just understand that you have tons of time. You don't have to take shortcuts. You don't have to try to take the easy route. You can actually take harder routes, and over time, they'll probably pay out better for you, not financially, but in terms of your collecting, in terms of your knowledge within the space, all of that. You have more than likely many of years to be able to do this and enjoy this sort of stuff, so don't put that pressure on yourself each and every day that this is the day you got to make the moves, because at the end of the day, you're going to have more than enough time, so make sure to enjoy it. But yeah, that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you enjoyed. Again, if you did, make sure to leave a like. I'd appreciate it greatly. If you want to see more videos like this as soon as they go live, make sure to subscribe. If you have friends that are relatively new to the hobby, please share this with them. It'd mean the world to me, and I'm sure it'd help them a good bit. Would love to hear your thoughts down below in a comment as well. And with that said, hopefully you have a wonderful day, and peace.